Job 40, 15 to 24. That's the one I was looking for about dinosaurs, which refers to the dinosaurs created in day 6. Look now at the behemoth, which I made along with you. He eats grass like an ox. See now, his strength is in his hips, and his power is in his stomach muscles. He moves his tail like a cedar. The sinews of his thighs are tightly knit. His bones are like beams of bronze, his ribs like bars of iron. He is the first of the ways of God. Only he who made him can bring near his sword. Just insurmountable sized animal. Surely the mountains yield food to him, and all the beasts of the field play there. He lies under the lotus trees in a covert of reeds and marsh. The lotus trees cover him with their shade. The willows by the brook surround him. Indeed, the river may rage. Yet he is not disturbed. He is confident, though the Jordan gushes into his mouth. Huge, though he takes it in his eyes, or one pierces his nose with a snare. Notice that the monster behemoth has a tail like a cedar tree, bones like huge tubes of bronze, limbs like giant bars of iron, an armor plate with barbs, which makes him invincible. He drinks huge amounts of water. He is the first of the works of God. Refers to the first in size, the largest of the animals that God created. The behemoth is so awesome that there is nothing that he fears, nor which can defeat him. The description of an animal which existed alongside of man can be nothing other than the huge land-dwelling reptilian dinosaur. Furthermore, Job 41, 1-34 describes a leviathan. Now that was a land man. Now this is a water-dwelling, breathing thing, living thing. Describes a leviathan as a water-dwelling monster who is likewise invincible, fearsome, fire-breathing. Note that similar type reptiles and other creatures that exist today can breathe out flames, which are much smaller, and with an atmosphere with a much higher oxygen content, this characteristic would be even more prevalent in pre-flood times. More oxygen, better foliage, the larger the animal. This monster has a scaly reptilian-like hide with sharp protective protrusions, which could not be pierced by sword, spear, or other weapon. The Leviathan can raise himself up to do battle, against whom no one can prevail. And Leviathan is so huge that when he moves through the water, it is described as follows. When Leviathan rises, the mighty are terrified. They withdraw because of his thrashing. The sword that reaches him will have no effect, nor will a spear, dart, or arrow. Interesting. Spear, they're things made by man, so man had coexisted, see? He regards iron as straw and bronze as rotten wood. No arrow can make him flee. Sling stones become like stubble to him. A club is regarded as stubble, and he laughs at the sound of a javelin. His undersides are jagged potsherds, spreading the mud like a threshy sledge. He makes the depths seethe like a cauldron. He makes the sea like an ointment jar. He leaves a shining weight behind him. One would think the deep had gray hair. He has no equal on earth, a creature devoid of fear. He surveys everything that is haughty. He is king over all the proud beasts. Such a creature could only be a water-dwelling reptilian-like monster which roamed the earth the same time as man did. The Hebrew word transliterated tan, or singular, plural is tannin, whales, dragons, sea monsters, and serpents. TWOT, the word denotes any large reptile, referring to anything from large snakes to enormous sea creatures. Note that the Hebrew word for jackals is very similar to tannin, the plural form for tan, large reptile, singular, since evidence for dinosaur dragon types was not yet discovered at the time of the 1611 King James translation of the Bible. The word jackals was substituted instead of in a number of places in Scripture. Nevertheless, dinosaurs are correctly rendered here. So much for the King James at that point. So, continuing on in Genesis 1:20-23, Henry Morris states, the first animals specifically mentioned as the product of this act of creation were the great whales, or great sea monsters, as most translations render the Hebrew word tannin. It is significant, however, that this same word was most frequently translated dragon. Evidently, the term includes all large sea creatures, even the monsters of the past that are now extinct. We have fossil records of them, too. The frequent references to dragons in the Bible, as well as in the early records and traditions of most of the nations of antiquity, certainly cannot be shrugged off as mere fairy tales. Most probably they represent memories of dinosaurs created in day 6, handed down by tribal ancestors who encountered them before they became extinct. And Morris again says, Genesis 1:21 says that God created great whales, but the Hebrew word for whales, tanyin, is translated dragons in over 20 other passages. Note especially Isaiah 27:1. In that day the Lord shall punish Leviathan, the piercing serpent, even Leviathan, that crooked serpent, and he shall slay the dragon that is in the sea. This type of sea dragon was called Leviathan. It was described by God himself in Job 41:1-34 as a fearsome, fire-breathing monster whose scaly hide could not be pierced with sword or spear. God also described a huge land dragon created in day 6 called Behemoth, that moveth his tail like a cedar tree, and is the chief of the ways of God, impossible to capture. Various other dragons are depicted as dwelling in different types of habitats and as being of various sizes. In some of these cases, modern translations have rendered tanyin as jackal, but the Hebrew word means dragon or monster, not jackal. Dragons were even described in reputable zoological treatises published during the Middle Ages. Even though dragons sometimes were said to have supernatural abilities, all these ancient nations regarded them as real animals, frequently encountered by humans. The article on dragons in the Encyclopedia Britannica noted also that dinosaurs were astonishingly dragon-like, even though its author assumed that those ancients who believed in dragons did so without the slightest knowledge of dinosaurs. All dinosaurs assumed by evolutionary geologists to have been extinct since the end of the Mesozoic era, about 65 million years ago, whereas the first dinosaur fossils were not discovered until early in the 19th century. In any case, dinosaurs, like dragons, are said to have existed at one time in great numbers and varieties all over the world. Great dinosaur bone beds have been found on every continent as far as north as Spitsbergen in the Arctic Ocean and as far south as Antarctica, about 400 miles from the South Pole. Even more astonishing have been the vast numbers of dinosaur tracks and trails. The Symposium Dinosaur Tracks and Traces documents hundreds of dinosaur track sites all over the world. They are found in alluvial fan deposits, floodplain sediments, lake sediments, dune-like formations, deltas, and shoreline systems. Many geologists have decided recently that the age of the dinosaur did come to a sudden end as a result of a global catastrophe of some kind, although there is much disagreement as to what type of catastrophe this may have been. A great flood, accompanied by tremendous eruptions with the implied resulting and worldwide climatic change from subtropical to the present latitudinal variations, could well account for the vast dinosaur graveyards and truckways all over the world. The Bible, of course, describes just such a flood that occurred several thousand years ago. There are now thousands of scientists who have become creationists and are convinced that the biblical flood provides a much better explanation than the geological age system for the phenomena of Earth's history, including the dinosaurs and their extinction. In that connection, suppose the dinosaurs continued to survive for a time in the post-flood world. This would account perfectly for all the dragon stories, many embellished over the centuries with legendary accretions, but at the same time based on a substantial residuum of fact. Bill Cooper, a British student of antiquities, has published a most impressive compilation of dragon-dinosaur encounters with ancient people. The book Living Dinosaurs from Anglo-Saxon and other early records. It may even be that some dinosaurs still survive in isolated regions, and especially in the oceans and deep lakes of the world. The famous plesiosaur-like creature dredged up near New Zealand in 1977, and the numerous native accounts of a brontosaur-like item in the swampy interior of the Congolese rainforests should be neither dismissed nor ignored. Most creationists believe that dinosaurs have coexisted with man from the beginning, only becoming extinct in the Middle Ages. That being so, one must envision a pre-flood world with vast herds of dinosaurs occupying many areas in every region. The antediluvian population would certainly be familiar with their existence. Even after the flood, dinosaurs could still be seen occasionally, though not in the great herds of common in former times. The climax of the Satan-caused sufferings of the prophet Job, for example, God told him to observe two of these great animals, the land-dwelling behemoth and the ocean-dwelling leviathan, and to realize that even though no man alone could ever vanquish such awesome reptiles, God was well able to defeat them, for it was he who had made them. Although the behemoth was the strongest of all created land animals, he that made him can make his sword to approach unto him. Job 40:19. And though the Leviathan is the king over all the children of pride, yet God says that not even Leviathan can stand before me. God one day shall punish Leviathan, and he shall slay the dragon that is in the sea. So all kinds of sea and bird life are immediately created, from the simplest to the most complex. The first introduction of animal life was not a fragile blob of protoplasm that happened to come together in response to electrical discharges over a primeval ocean, as evolutionists believe, without proof. Rather, the waters suddenly swarmed abundantly with swarming creatures like the waters that did not bring forth, as translated in the Authorized Version, the American version of the King James Version. The Hebrew word sherets, which is rendered by moving creatures in the Authorized Version, is actually to be translated creeping thing in the 11 other places where it occurs. It seems to be essentially synonymous with reams, which is also translated creeping thing. As used in Genesis 1:20, however, it refers rather to all kinds of marine animals, invertebrates, vertebrates, and reptiles. So Henry Morris states, in the biblical sense, plants do not have real life or soul or consciousness, but both animals and men do. The types of animals mentioned in this passage are apparently intended to include every inhabitant of the waters and atmosphere. Furthermore, each was to reproduce after its own kind. Like the various plants, the actual biochemical reproductive systems of the animals were programmed to assure the fixity of the kinds. Physically and chemically, animals are similar to plants. Modern genetics has shown that all replicating systems function in the framework of the marvelous information program in the DNA molecule. The DNA for each kind is programmed to allow for wide individual variations within the kind, but not beyond the structure of the kind itself. In this case, God not only declared that his work was good, but also pronounced the blessing on the animals he had created. Though not an object of God's love as man would be, animals nevertheless are objects of his care and concern. Not even a sparrow would ever fall to the ground without his noticing and caring, and he continually provides food for them. The blessing included both a command and a provision for the continued multiplication of the animals he had created, so that they would soon occupy all parts of the world. It is interesting that a similar command was given later to the animals emerging from the ark after the flood. Now recall, though, when sin entered the world, the animals would be completely different, in a sense that many died, and it would seem that God didn't care. But that's because sin entered the world. But during his initial creation, not even a sparrow would even fall to the ground without his noticing and caring. We have to worry about context here, and not misread. Life, nephesh, 3 definitions which are used in Scripture. Life, nephesh, that invisible and immaterial life principle which animates the bodies of animals and man. So the word life occurs for the first time in this verse, Hebrew nephesh. Actually, this is the word also for soul, and is frequently used to refer to both the soul of man and the life of animals. Depends upon context. And Dr. Robert A. Morey, Death in the Afterlife, excellent book on that subject. The word nephesh refers to that invisible and immaterial life principle which animates the bodies of animals and man. In Genesis, in these passages, an animal is called a nephesh as long as it is living. A dead animal is never called a nephesh because its body would be devoid of the life principle. In this sense, once the life principle is breathed into the body of Adam, All right. More on this next time. Lost my place.